I never imagined that the daughter I had raised, supported, and poured my heart into would one day turn her back on me so cruelly. From the moment Ava was born, I devoted myself to giving her the best life possible, making sacrifices no father should have to make, always putting her needs before my own. And when it came time for her wedding, the most important day of her life, I spared no expense. I funded everything: the lavish venue, the elegant catering, the breathtaking floral arrangements. Every detail, down to the last embroidered napkin, was paid for with my hard-earned money. But nothing could have prepared me for the gut-wrenching betrayal that awaited. Days before the wedding, as I casually glanced over the final guest list, my blood ran cold. My name along with my wife's was nowhere to be found. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, a clerical error. Surely Ava wouldn't exclude her own father, the man who made this day possible. But when I called to clarify, the response shattered me. Not only had I been deliberately left off the list, but I had been explicitly banned from attending. The venue staff had strict instructions to deny me entry should I dare to show up. The sting of humiliation was unbearable. The daughter I had cherished had cast me aside like a stranger. What had I done to deserve such cruelty? Was this her way of repaying a lifetime of love and devotion? As I stood there, reeling from the shock, a darker thought crept in: had I ever truly known my own child at all? The betrayal burned like a brand against my chest, but I refused to be cast aside without an explanation. My own daughter had exiled me from her wedding after everything I had done for her. I deserved answers. I deserved to know why. When I finally confronted Ava, expecting at least a sliver of remorse, I was met with something far worse: cold indifference. She stood before me, arms crossed, her expression unreadable, as if I were a mere acquaintance, rather than the father who had sacrificed for her. "You had no right to check the guest list," she said, her voice sharp, unyielding. This wedding was mine, and I decided who was welcome. The sheer audacity of it made my stomach churn. Her wedding. As if I hadn't financed every last detail. As if she hadn't come to me, time and time again, expecting me to foot the bill without question. But before I could argue, Ava struck the final blow. "You owed me this," she spat, eyes flashing with something venomous. "After all those years of standing against me, instead of with me. You always took someone else's side, mums, your precious wives, even those outsiders. Never mine." I stared at her, struggling to comprehend the twisted logic. She was rewriting history, painting herself as the victim, when she had been the storm, wreaking havoc wherever she pleased. She hadn't been some neglected, unloved child. I had given her everything, even when she didn't deserve it. Even when she tormented her cousin, humiliating her at every turn. I had been the one, smoothing things over, shielding Ava from real consequences. Even when she was caught experimenting with drugs, I had been the one who saved her from ruining her own future. But none of it mattered. Ava had convinced herself I was the villain in her story. And the worst part? She believed it. Ava's words echoed in my mind, like a relentless drumbeat: "You owed me this." It wasn't just the cruelty of her statement that cut deep, but the sheer entitlement. She had erased every sacrifice, every moment I had stood by her, and replaced it with a twisted narrative where I was the villain. My own daughter had exiled me from the wedding I had funded, dismissing me like an afterthought. But she had made one fatal mistake. This wedding was mine to give and mine to take away. Fury and heartbreak battled inside me as I made the call. One by one, I dismantled every piece of the grand event she had so arrogantly claimed as her own. The venue. Cancelled. The caterers. Gone. The photographer. The flowers. The live band. All of it. Every deposit, every contract, had my name on it. I had signed the checks. And now, I was taking them back. I said nothing to Ava. Let her believe her perfect day was still intact. Let her bask in her self-righteousness. She would learn soon enough. The reckoning came on the day she had planned to walk down the aisle. Dressed in white, glowing with expectation, Ava arrived at the venue with her bridal party only to find the doors locked. Confused, she tried to push past the security guards standing at the entrance, only for them to block her path. "There's no wedding here," one of them stated firmly. "What do you mean? My wedding is today." Ava's voice rose in panic. Not anymore. The reservation was cancelled. The color drained from her face as realization struck. Everything was gone. The guests arrived only to find confusion and chaos. The decorations had been taken down. The reception hall was empty. There was no ceremony, no celebrations, just the brutal truth sinking in. I wasn't there to see the moment. Ava understood the full weight of her actions, but I didn't need to be. She had pushed me aside without a second thought. Now, she knew what it felt like to be truly abandoned. Ava was furious when the wedding fell apart, but I wasn't prepared for the fury that followed. She started bombarding me with calls, desperate, enraged, and demanding answers. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. I blocked her number, knowing that any attempt to reason with her would only be another round of toxic gas. Ava's anger was like wildfire, spreading quickly, and soon, it was my own parents who came knocking on my door. They were outraged, of course. How could I do this to my daughter? They demanded, their faces flushed with disbelief. I'd always been the good parent, the one who tried to fix every mistake she made, who forgave her over and over again. But this time, I stood firm. This time, I wasn't going to let Ava tear me apart any longer. I expected them to take her side. I had braced myself for the onslaught of guilt trips, for their disappointment in my decision. But what happened next was nothing like I had anticipated. Ava, in her rage, reached out to them as well, and in an all-too-typical move. She lashed out, belittling and insulting my parents. She didn't just ignore their concerns, she attacked them. That was the breaking point for my parents. They had always tried to keep peace, but watching Ava treat them like disposable objects broke them. They were stunned, yes, but something shifted in them. In the end, it was their own daughter who pushed them to the side, leaving them with no choice but to support my decision. They had been blind to her toxic behavior for far too long. They apologized to me. They expressed regret for how they had failed me, as I tried to protect Ava. And we stood together, united in the aftermath of the chaos she had caused. Ava's betrayal had, ironically, brought us closer, though it was a bitter victory. The devastation of the ruined wedding was just the climax of a storm that had been brewing for years. Ava hadn't simply become this entitled, ungrateful woman overnight. Her defiance, her bitterness, her cruelty had deep roots. And I had spent most of my life trying, failing, to pull her back from the edge. Ava was a difficult child, but adolescence turned her into a nightmare. She despised my wife, Mercy, from the moment they met. No matter how many times Mercy extended kindness, Ava met it with venom. She accused her of stealing my love, of replacing her mother, of turning me against her. In truth, Ava had been losing me long before Mercy arrived. She spiraled into rebellion, skipping school, failing classes, getting arrested for possession. Each time I tried to help her. Each time she threw my efforts back in my face. I paid for the best rehab facilities, only for Ava to relapse within months. I hired tutors, but she never showed up for lessons. I defended her when she was caught stealing, only to find out she had done it again. The worst of it came when she was 17. I had spent thousands on yet another rehab program, believing, hoping, that this time she would change. But instead of gratitude, Ava ran away the day she was released, disappearing for weeks. I found her half-conscious, in a filthy motel room, surrounded by the remnants of yet another overdose. I should have let her go. I should have accepted that she didn't want to be saved. But I couldn't. I kept fighting for a daughter who refused to fight for herself. And yet, after everything she had the audacity to tell me, I had never stood by her. That I had always chosen others over her. But that was the bitter truth, wasn't it? I had chosen her time and time again, and all it had ever done was destroy us both. Ava's hatred for Mercy ran deep, and it was clear that it wasn't just about the present, it was rooted in years of bitterness. Since Mercy came into our lives, Ava had never given her a chance. She had painted her as a gold digger, a woman after my wealth. Despite the fact that Mercy had built her own successful career, long before we ever crossed paths. Ava couldn't see past her jealousy and resentment, clinging to the belief that Mercy had somehow stolen what should have been hers. The truth was, Ava's disdain for Mercy was just a symptom of something much darker, the anger she had toward her own mother, who had abandoned her when she was still a child. Her mother's departure had left a scar so deep that nothing, not even the love and care I had given her, could fill the void. Mercy came into the picture, and Ava saw her as a convenient target to project all her unresolved pain and bitterness. But Mercy didn't play the role. Ava wanted her to. She didn't bow to her, didn't try to win her favor. Instead, Mercy kept her distance, giving Ava the space she craved. But that only fueled Ava's suspicion, driving her to see Mercy's success as a threat rather than an accomplishment. What Ava didn't understand was that her hatred for Mercy was just an outlet for her own unresolved feelings toward her birth mother. Ava never reconciled with her past, and she projected her anger onto anyone who came close. Her inability to see Mercy as an equal, as a woman who had worked hard for everything she had, was a reflection of her own unresolved bitterness and abandonment issues. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make her see that Mercy wasn't the enemy. It was the ghosts of her past that haunted her. But Ava wasn't ready to face those demons. Instead, she chose to keep lashing out, pushing away those who tried to help her. Even after everything, as I sat in the silence of my home, I couldn't escape the weight pressing down on my chest. The decision to cancel Ava's wedding had not been made lightly. It was not an act of revenge, nor was it done out of spite. It was a painful, necessary consequence, a final attempt to show her that actions have repercussions, that she could not continue to exploit and mistreat those who had stood by her. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. I had envisioned that day so differently. I had pictured myself walking her down the aisle, seeing the joy in her eyes as she stepped into a new chapter of her life. Instead, I had ensured that the wedding never happened. As much as I wanted to believe she would finally understand, that she would take a long, hard look at herself, deep down, I feared she never would. Ava had always been quick to blame others, to twist reality until she became the victim in her own story. No matter how much I had sacrificed for her, she had never seen me as someone who loved and protected her, only as an obstacle, a figure who had failed to meet her expectations. But I could not keep enabling her. She needed to learn responsibility, to understand that the world would not always bend to her will. Mercy had warned me for years that Ava took advantage of my love, and I had ignored it, hoping that one day she would grow out of it, that she would change. But she never did. And perhaps, if I had held her accountable sooner, things wouldn't have come to this. Regret gnawed at me, but I knew one thing for certainty: had done what needed to be done. If Ava ever wanted to rebuild what was broken, it would have to start with her. Until then, all I could do was let go.